Whoa, sorry, a little dark. Yeah, getting late. Well, it's raining, and so it makes the late look later. Anyway, extremely tired. Yeah, it's tuckered all out. But we will endeavor to persevere. I don't know what that beep was, but whatever. Yeah, so a little further thought on the Corey Anton discussion, as it's called. I keep hearing a beep. Well, it's not the camera, I guess. Anyway, yeah, you read the comments, and it's just so discouraging. Because it didn't seem as bad as these commenters. But anyway, whatever. Idiots. Morons. Fuckwits. Yeah, but there was one comment that did stick out. I mean, some guy who was, pointing out some sort of contradiction about my point about subjective opinions of life's accomplishment or value. And I was only using that as an example of the fact that neither testimony is of any value, because you're going to have people at these opposite extremes. You're going to have somebody who's going to be highly sensitive and say nothing's worth it, and other people who are so ego-driven, want the victory so bad that they're willing to endure all kinds of crap to get it, because they see so much purpose in whatever the victory is they're after, climbing the mountain or whatever the nonsense is. And so, yeah, the testimony of individual humans doesn't mean too much if it has no context of an argument behind it, some sort of logic that makes some sense of these value equations. So I'm going to argue that I don't have an explicit definition of what is worth what. I would argue that that definition is probably composable with enough information, or even with enough thought given to the subject. Just as we can figure out and say pretty emphatically that slavery isn't worth it, that the suffering imposed is not worth any social gains or productivity or anything else gleaned from it, that it's not an acceptable price to pay, either because it causes too much suffering overtly, or there's another ethical issue that it's doing it through this imposition. It's not fairly choosing who's going to be victimized by the who's going to have to pay the price. And there's the same argument we're always going to keep going back to in anti-natalism, where we can talk about the game itself being futile and stupid, and that's one point to make about life being rather wasteful and inefficient. And then there's the ethical argument that of the imposition, of the fact that there is an ethical trespass, and that you're playing the game with non-compliant, people who haven't sanctioned your use of them as fodder for your engine. You don't have a right to enslave the losers to have your mediocrity or your victory, no matter how you subjectively perceive it. And you have to deal with both of those. You have to somehow undo the arguments that come with both of those. Somebody could argue that the taste of their good meal is worth the animal that suffered to produce it. But I think, like with these other equations of other hardships imposed, that's going to fail, but through intelligence, through edification. We're going to know that the fact that men might prefer to have controllable women doesn't give them the right to have controllable women by force. And likewise, you can't have slaves, and likewise you can't impose the risks of life without engineering it. So it's yourself that has to pay the price in some way. That you are gamble with your own welfare and not somebody else's. So you're going to have to narrow the psychological possibilities of those newborn humans to somehow narrow them to your own range of psychological perception. and not allow them to be smarter than you. And I'm going to argue that it is that empathy grows with intelligence. The smarter you become, the more capable you become of understanding the triviality of your pleasures and the depth of the miseries. And yeah, I think I can logically defend that argument, demonstrating just throughout history how it is through edification that we learned how wrong it was, how bad it was, that so many were abused so shabbily, and all that crap. So anyway, there's no contradiction. I'm not saying it's a subjective discussion exclusively. I'm just saying most people have a subjective, ill-informed, sloppily defined description of their life's functionality. They just spout an opinion, and it's not a well-articulated opinion, a well-evidenced opinion. It's just it's more like their ego talking than any kind of knowledge talking. And of course, I've also pointed out that there's not much point in surveying people on how magnificent life is in the middle of their life, or when they're 22 years old, or when they're 14. You want the truth, then you're going to have to survey them at the very last moments of their life, when they've gotten every bite of it, every bug-infested bite, and they've gotten the highest part of the check, and then let them say it was a good deal. And it might even be even better if they could see their children's death, how their children will die, and see how their grandchildren will die, and see the pain and the suffering that will be experienced by their kids. Oblige them to have that part of their context, so they know exactly what they stepped into, what they were part of, and what they imposed on all these future individuals. But again, I'm always going to be able to argue the defensive position that what we do know is this is a ride we have to do together. We either go on it together or we don't go on it together. But you can't do it halfway. Your half can't be allowed to do its thing. You know, it's I have a right to procreate thing without disengaging my right to prevent my re-existence. So there is a conflict of rights here. There's just no way of unraveling that. You won't give birth to yourself, people. You're going to give birth to a new individual who, through random chance or whatever, is going to have just as likely a probability to turn out with your opinions as it will turn out to have my opinions. Unless it's raised in a monoculture like the Middle East or someplace where opinions are not allowed to be divergent from the doctrine. And anybody with any intelligence should say that is a crime against humanity, to engineer psychologies the way it's done in those cultures, through just gross brutality, suppression, and disengagement of the intellectual mind. No freedom, suppression. But that's what it would require for you to create a world where you could protect against the creation of the individual who will protest. And I guess I would further argue that there are a whole class of individuals who will be born mentally deficient, who will suffer a great deal, and who don't have the capacity to protest. They don't have a capacity to articulate and express their unhappiness with being injected into a circumstance where they have little hope of gaining much, if any, satisfaction and face decades, perhaps, of dismal, harsh, and unpleasant experience. So someone should speak for them also. And I intend to do that, sort of. So anyway, but yeah, people always pick what sentences they want and distort issues. Really wasn't my intention to get on antinatalism in the conversation with Professor Anton. It just seems an inescapable subject now, because it really is tied to this fact that there is an unintelligent design. It is consumption, reproduction, cannibalism, and addiction. Just another male human posted a video the other day, one of my 4-year-old videos, where I was basically arguing the same thing. I just didn't call it antinatalism, but did point out that it is a crude, stupid, friction-filled game that cannot do anything. There is nothing. Again, accomplishment has to be accomplishment. As any human being is going to describe something that's an accomplishment in this world, that thing would always have to, in some way, ease or please or satiate, I don't think that's a word, a sentient creature. It would have to comfort a consciousness of some kind for it to be called accomplishment. So it either has to feed their personal ego and gain them satisfaction through that, or it has to be an act that is in some way beneficial in net value to a collective of sentient creatures for it to be called accomplishment. So as individuals, if those are the rules, why wouldn't the same rule apply to the human race? And it seems just logical that as a species we should be fulfilling some mission of accomplishment. And and as I've pointed out in the video, and that has not been argued by anybody rationally, we can serve. We can comfort nothing in the universe. We first create the damage, and then we attempt to repair it. By very definition, that should be the definition of futility. To create a need that doesn't need to exist, that is difficult to entirely satiate, would be the definition of foolhardy, moronic, stupid, pointless, insane, crazy, ludicrous, nonsensical, unintelligent. And so maybe that's the word I have to push, is that not only is this design unintelligent, but apparently, even with our billions of neurons, we still aren't capable of reliably processing information and doing the intelligent thing, which is to honor the truth, accept the reality for what it is, and conform our definition of accomplishment to that reality, and quit pretending there is accomplishment in reproducing for the sake of it. Reproducing for the sake of reproduction is, again, not a sensical or intelligent procedure. It's you have to do it for the sake of something else, the sake of a real beneficial accomplishment. Yeah. So anyway, just more context. Like an hour and a half wasn't enough. Yeah, here's some more. Lucky you. But again, so this discussion did sort of illustrate that it's not about discussing. It was a pretty passive conversation, and still nothing was resolved. We still need a mechanism that obliges the conversation to accept some premises and then argue the logic that is indicated by those premises. And I think if that is done, the conversation will be disengaged by the fact that there will be disagreement over fundamental premises, like a belief in something extraordinary, a god of sorts. Professor Anton sort of admitted it in the conversation when he said he believes there is some sort of intelligence behind the universe. I can't remember his exact terminology, but an indication that it is not unintelligent design, that there is in fact something more to be revealed, yet he could give no indication of what that might be. So anyway, till next time.